Hey guys, it's Shnickerman here. Today we're going to try something new. This is going to be the first episode of my podcast called Shnickcast. And on this podcast, I want to focus on having interviews with my friends about games that they're really passionate about. And if I'm into the game, we can have a nice discussion. And if I'm not super into the game, I'll ask questions about why they enjoy that game and what they want to see with the game going forward. The first episode, I interview my friend Xaida, who is a really big Final Fantasy VIII fan, as well as myself. And for this specific episode, we targeted talking about Final Fantasy VIII as if it was going to get a Final Fantasy VII Remake style game, and what we would expect to see from mechanics and different things like that, and just overall what we would want to see from a Final Fantasy VIII Remake. So I hope you guys enjoy. Here it is. So first we're going to talk about the actual story of Final Fantasy VIII, and I want to mention that for the remake of 7, they do have some liberty to change things around a little bit, and also to add in additional scenes to clarify things and just add more detail into the story overall. So I guess first we could say maybe where do we think they can add in little details that we think would improve the story overall?
Adding in little bits of lore. The
So
idea with Guardian forces and those little flashback scenes of just memories of the past.
yeah, and maybe even just more insight into what the Guardian forces are, where they came from,
Yeah,
how
I
they
think
came into
that would help
existence,
explain a
right?
lot more too. Yeah,
That would be super cool because I feel like in most Final Fantasy games, summons are like gods, right? And they might, you can just kind of like harness their power, right? But
yeah.
Guardian Forces are a little different, and obviously there's a whole mechanic involved in it, or they have an effect on the player. So maybe more to see that duality of like they're extremely powerful, but obviously like it takes a toll on your body, and why does it do that? Or maybe they're making a deal with these people, like the Guardian Forces are like deities, and it's like the only way you can harness their power is if you sacrifice something, right?
Well, one thing
Um,
I just remembered that wasn't very detailed in explanation that I think could open up a lot more of a deep dive into it if they do decide to go that route. When they're all at the basketball court at Trabia Garden,
yeah.
Selfie talks about how either there or it's at the beach of the orphanage, where she talks about how she found a guardian force when she was
Hmm.
young,
Yeah.
but it was never really explained further than that.
Yeah, and we
I
should
feel
get
like
more detail, definitely, of what it is. How did she
what
find it?
guardian forces
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
I feel like could go into that, and maybe in saying that guardian forces are used around the garden for um, creation purposes or fixing things or stuff like that. I think in
Yeah.
having that and kind of ingraining guardian forces used with Balam Garden, Trabia Garden, and Galbadia Garden, and or even just Balam Garden, and would it, I feel like explain more about why 90% most of the cast is having these memory issues from their
Mhm.
time at the orphanage.
Sure. I think that's good. And honestly, as soon as we started talking about it, I was like, yeah, 100%, because it's like Guardian Forces are a pretty big role in the game, whether it's gameplay, actually fighting with them, or the story, and you really don't know anything about them, and they never really explain much of anything. So,
Yeah, that's one thing I mean, there's one thing I like about the game is that all of those mechanics they actually tried to put it into the story. I
yeah.
just don't. In retrospect, I don't think it was done as well as it could have been. And I
Yeah, I
think if they
agree.
were to remake this game, this would be the chance
Hmm.
to give more backstory on Guardian Forces, who they are, what they come from, how they came to be, and just more on the drawing system, junction system, and really just ironing over those details. More information about Laguna, more information about Adea, more information about Ultimisia if they
Yeah.
can figure that one out too. I feel like really just dig more into the lore of the game and the
Yeah.
story of the game, and give subtle hints to it.
Yeah, they could honestly add so much content to the game just by explaining mechanics that are already there, like drawing. Let's take drawing for example. It's like, in what world, like what are they doing to take the magic from the enemies? Like what's the idea there, right? Obviously it's a game mechanic, but they can turn that into something in this world and create more of a nice picture about the world that you're playing a character in, right?
Yeah, and they can even
Yeah.
say that Guardian Forces allow us to pull magic
Yeah, exactly.
from resources or enemies and
Hmm.
stuff like that.
Parts of the earth or parts of the planet or whatever. I don't think we actually
Pull
know
it
whether
from the
they're
life
on
stream.
earth. So one thing I was thinking as well is, for the actual story, I did mention that the story can be a little bit confusing. So I'm also wondering if maybe they can clean it up a bit by adding in additional scenes that might clarify for the actual player, but not show the characters. Because I think the twists that the game have is really crucial to the actual story,
Yeah.
because there's a reason why the characters don't remember things and this and that, right? But maybe there's scenes that they can do, like a flashback that might show the player of the game what's going on a little bit earlier on, or just hint at certain things so it's not so much of a twist. Because I think players might just be super confused.
Yeah, so I mean, especially with regards to Adea and her backstory,
Mm-hmm.
um, I can definitely see a lot of people being confused about what's going on, especially once you beat her in Galbadia Garden. Then immediately, okay, now Adea is good. Now there's a
Yeah,
new
exactly.
person in Ultimecia. So now it's there's so, and even then you don't exactly know who it is. You just see like a flash of her
Right.
overtaking Renoa. So there is a lot of a lot of small details that cause a lot of confusion. My question then though is how can you shore up that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
I
See,
mean, there's no real way to introduce Ultimecia as a character pre Disc 3.
hmm.
Absolutely no way. No one's gonna know about Ultimecia because the only person who does is Adea.
Yeah, but they can. That's the thing, is they can take a little bit of a change there. They can add something in, because, like, my example is for the remake again. It's like they're adding in additional things which might not necessarily be canon to the original. However, if you think about the fan base, somebody like you and me, we already know the story, right? So, regardless what they do, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter. It's not going to affect my enjoyment of the game necessarily, right?
Yeah,
But I'm just thinking again, if you think about a mainstream audience that's going to want to enjoy this game, and guaranteed they wouldn't make it unless they were sure that people are going to be able to follow the story, they might have to make tweaks. And so I think that would definitely be something they might do, especially where you mentioned it as well. But yeah.
so I feel like this is probably going to be one of the more controversial
Okay,
statements, maybe.
sure.
But the whole Guardian Forces making them forget, with how little it was mentioned early on of the price of using Guardian
Right.
Forces, for it to just kind of be brought up when it was, when after they freed Adea, or no, right before they freed Adea, how all of that just kind of appeared out of nowhere.
Well, I think that that's something
So
that they can hint at early on now,
yeah,
right?
that's
Like,
what I was gonna
yeah,
say.
for
But
sure.
not only that, I feel like they could probably take that a step further. Like maybe they can have a flashback, because another thing that and I'm gonna get back to what I was about to say, but another thing that they never really showed was, had they had access to Guardian Forces before the events of Final Fantasy VIII? Like when they
Uh,
first got the garden, were they using Guardian Forces, or was it just like, oh, the game starts and now you have Quetzalcoatl and Shiva, and now you're forgetting everything? Like
yeah.
if they have like some kind of maybe they show something to that. But what I was gonna say was, maybe in the first time that you're acquiring Guardian Forces,
Yeah.
they cut to a flashback of a memory that character's forgetting, and
Yes.
then you can maybe cut to the orphanage, and it would kind of pique a little bit of interest, like, oh, what's this?
That's
Oh, this looks like an orphanage.
that's like
Who's
exactly what I
this?
was thinking.
Is
They can
this
cut to a
this must be
flashback.
Squall? This must
Yeah.
be Kid Squall.
It's like Squall picks up Shiva or like whatever, and then he uses it, and then after the battle you just like go into a flashback where it's just like a memory of him, and they're not specifically saying that it makes you forget things, but
Exactly.
eventually over time you're like, wait a second, these are things that they're like forgetting every
And
single
especially
time
when
that they do
Irvine
it.
brings up that plot twist of, oh, these things are making us forget. And then
Right.
you learn about the price of using Guardian Forces.
Yeah, and
I
exactly.
think that would be a good way to hint at major plot points without explicitly giving them away,
Yeah.
and without giving away the fact that Guardian Forces are the cause of it.
Exactly. Yeah, they have to be
It'll
careful
hint at
about that
Guardian
part.
Forces
Yeah.
being involved, if for people who would kind of pick up on patterns more likely, or if they just show it at the beginning of the game when you pick up Quetzalcoatl and Shiva, and then nothing else after.
Yeah. And I think it makes a lot of sense because like the orphanage is obviously a key thing. But yeah,
Yeah.
imagine when like even let's just say just for Squall, when Squall uses the Guardian Force the first time, they show a flashback of the orphanage and you get a little bit of a peek. And then later when they're like, "Hey, we all knew each other before, we just don't remember." Then it's like, "Whoa, I get it. I get it." Like that's why we saw that flashback, right? And then you're like, "Okay, that makes sense." Because even for me playing it for the first time, I was like, what is going on? Like, I have no idea what's going on. And then I'm like, they knew each other? And I'm like, anyway, so,
Yeah, so I'm
um,
gonna say the first time I played the game is when I was 8. There was no way I was
yeah,
following that
yeah,
story.
like, and
I was
yeah,
so hooked on the game mechanics. I thought it was really fun, and
yeah.
all these battles, and I just really enjoyed it. And then when I got older and started to really follow the story, then I started to kind of pick up on more things like that.
But that's what I'm saying. I think that doing little things like that is like, it can help a younger audience actually understand the
Definitely.
actual story, right?
Definitely,
Because that,
especially for one that can be very confusing.
yes, and it's almost like notoriously known for being wacky and hard to understand when you're playing the game. Um,
Mostly the junction system, I feel like, is
yeah,
probably people's biggest turn off with 8. But the story would probably be the second most confusing thing in the game,
okay.
from the perspective of somebody who isn't a fan of 8.
For the story overall, do we think that any of the major plot points or anything involving the main story needs to be really changed at all? Or do we think that it can kind of coexist and they'll add in additional parts to clarify on certain things?
I don't think you change the main story. I think you just expand on it,
Right.
give a little more hints, and make it a little bit more easily comprehended.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Um, and if we obviously Final Fantasy VII Remake is going to be multiple games. We don't know how many games, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5. Um, do you think that if we added all these additional story into the game that we could justify making it one game or perhaps taking out certain elements? I know that you'll say no to that, but if you had to make it into multiple games, what would you think about doing that?
I mean, there might be some parts that you can take out.
What would you think?
You can maybe cut down on the boat ride to Dalit.
Okay.
I don't think that needs to be as big as it was, although it did lead into a really awesome cutscene, in my opinion. I feel like you could still probably have that cutscene though, but
Okay.
just that dialogue doesn't need to be there, in my opinion. But it does add a little flavor, a little character development. Not development, but shows the characters of Cypher and Zell a bit, and how hot-headed Zell is, and how Cypher's
Sure.
just a prick.
But again, they
Um,
could do that in another scene just as
but
easily.
yeah,
That's
they
the
could do
thing.
that in other
Yeah.
ways. I mean, they do it throughout the Dalit mission anyway. But
Yeah.
yeah, there could be, I feel like, small things that don't take away from the main story that can be cut out.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, I would just like to see things expanded on.
Yeah, and I it's weird. I don't think the actual core story events of 8 are that long. Um, I think if you streamlined a bunch of them, you could maybe somehow try to fit it into a more recent gaming RPG experience time. But again, what do I know? Uh,
I mean, I could probably list through the main plot points of 8 very quickly.
yeah, but that's what I'm saying. There aren't really that many main plot points, and obviously there's a lot to explore and a lot to do. But the story itself is not that complicated, and it's fairly straightforward. So
It's not as complicated as it seems.
yes, that's what I'm saying.
There's a lot of moving parts is what makes it seem more complicated than it is.
Right, and I think
Again,
we can put some of those parts into these side things that you may have to go out of your way to find out, right?
yeah, so with regards to Adea and Ultimecia, you'd have to understand the Sorceress War and how sorceresses pass on their powers.
Mm-hmm.
And then towards the end, you kind of end up finding like that loop without giving away like
The main.
I mean, I might be giving away major spoilers for the end of the game, but understanding the Sorceress War, how sorcerers pass on their powers, would allow for a little bit more understanding in regards to that. But if you don't understand that stuff, then it just seems like it just can be very confusing and characters start appearing out of nowhere.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Um, Last question: if you had to split the game into two or multiple parts, what would you suggest as being the parts that you would select as the ending for the first part?
I think you keep the first part as the entire first disc.
Okay,
I
yeah,
feel
I
like
think that could
that
work.
part with Adea impaling Squall with the icicle on the right side of his body, mind you, through the shoulder, is a great stopping point for disc one
Yeah,
or for part one.
and
Um,
obviously the game takes a pretty decent shift after that as well.
yeah.
So it would definitely be kind of a cool cliffhanger, which is like cliffhanger. The game's been out for so long, but obviously the people that are playing the remake would most of them would not be aware of the original story. But yeah,
Also, with today's graphical power,
yeah,
I would love to see that scene detailed. It would be amazing.
I would love to just see, even if they didn't make a remake of a game, but they just turned it into like a movie, just like they did with like Advent Children. Obviously, Advent Children is not 7, but like if they just made like a nice movie for 8, that would make me very happy.
I mean,
But
just the main storyline elements of 8 and make it a movie. I would watch it over
yeah,
and over.
well, you joke around about that. Honestly, I mean, you don't joke around about it, but they actually did that with the Dragon Quest game. I forget exactly which one it is. It's on Netflix, and it's actually really good. So I mean, they could definitely do it. I think.
It's not out of the
Yeah, it's
cards yet.
not. Yeah, exactly. So the main thing I think for this for me would be like if you haven't played Final Fantasy VIII, there is an interweaving story with secondary characters that is taking place, and then in the end of the game, the two time like let's call it timelines, even though they're not timelines, but they're just two different character groups of characters' stories. They eventually meet up at a certain point at the end of the game. But because of this, parts of the game you're kind of forced to play this alternate story. So do we think that if they do a remake like this, would this be something that would remain the same, or would they mess with it at all? Because I think that they would probably have to in some sense. What do you think?
Well, the Laguna storyline I think is very integral to the story. So,
For sure, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
with regards to keeping it in, yes. Do they change it?
I'm not saying change the
Maybe.
story necessarily. I
No, no,
think that the
I'm not
way,
saying change the
yeah,
story either, but maybe change it up a little bit. Maybe have it so that I mean, for me, the biggest thing was when you would go from the main party to Laguna's party and then back to the main
yeah,
party. That now you might find that some characters just lost all their junctions. I think keeping that on them,
Yeah, that would definitely make
if they
sense.
continue with the junction system in the way that it is now, um, fixing that up, I think would be fine. Um, but I mean, more or less, I don't really know any way to improve on uh, the Laguna storyline. Not the storyline, but like the mechanics around it.
Yeah, again, I'm thinking it just might be something that a more mainstream audience might not be. They might not want to switch characters. Like I know, for example, the first thing I think about is like Kingdom Hearts 2, where you start as Roxas and you play as Roxas for a few hours, and then all of a sudden you're just not Roxas anymore and you're forced to play Sora, and that just felt really bad. So, what I'm kind of proposing here, and we can get your opinion, I don't think it would be a perfect system, but there are some games where, like, maybe you get to a certain point in the game and it opens up an option and you can go in your menu and select Laguna Story and then just say, okay, right now I'm going to play through chapter 1 of Laguna Story. And I'm not sure if it would mean like you don't necessarily have to play it, but in order to be like at least there be some flexibility when you could start it, to not be like, oh, I'm all of a sudden I can't play with Squall anymore. You know what I mean? Like maybe you could be like, as long as you play it within a certain time frame, or again, I mean, technically, if you didn't know anything about Laguna, yeah, it would obviously take away from the story a little bit, but then he would show up later anyway, and
Yeah.
maybe they could implement it like that. Again, it's like an additional thing that obviously, if you are a fan of the first game, you would definitely play it, but they wouldn't force you to play it. They would just say like you received Laguna Chapter 1, and then you'd be like, okay, I'm gonna play that right now, or no, I'm gonna wait a little bit and play it later. That's the only thing I was thinking.
So my thing is those transitions from the main party to playing as Laguna, I almost would feel is essential to the story with regards to Alone's powers,
Hmm.
and then
Yeah.
finding out that Laguna is the president of Esthar.
Yeah. Again, but this is also considering that the story is gonna stay exactly the same as well. But
I feel like I, uh, with using flashbacks in
hmm
a sense, they could kind of
yeah, you could get around it for sure in different ways.
it wouldn't necessarily be a flashback, but it would kind of be like it would give the player more knowledge
Hmm.
on Laguna without
Right.
the characters themselves, which then having those characters when they reach those plot twists, the character in game will have a reaction to it, but the player, I don't know if it would make the player more expectant of it. But my thinking is when you pick up the Timber Maniacs magazines,
Sure.
that they show like a small snippet of Laguna's life with regards to what's going on in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Seeing as
think
he
that'd be a
was
good way.
an editor for Timber Maniacs at some point in his life.
Yeah, that could be a way of doing it too. You could just be like, "Oh, you got Timber Maniacs issue 1. Do you want to play it now?" And you could
Yeah,
be like, "Yeah,
and
no, I don't care."
but you
Right?
can have. I think at that point you can have the Timber Maniacs as not a consumable item, but maybe like a key item that
Yeah,
will
yeah.
show you a video
That's
or
what I
give
mean.
you
Yeah,
or tell you information about Laguna and who he is,
absolutely.
and then I think that way it might weave in a little bit more when you first become Laguna's party in when you're heading to Galbadia.
Right. And I'm also thinking like imagine all these modern games that have like audio logs that you can listen to or not listen to at any given time. If you want to listen to it, you're obviously going to learn the nitty-gritty parts about the story, maybe some things that they don't want to tell the general audience, but if you want to go out of your way and listen to it, you can.
Yeah, I
That's
think
kind
we
of what I'm
can both
thinking.
agree that
Yeah.
one thing they can do with the story without drastically changing it is just ex- expanding on the lore, but also making it a little bit more accessible to people who are
Right.
new to the story.
Because my other second thought for the whole Laguna thing is that it can do something like almost exactly what you said, give snippets or videos or flashbacks of the main things. Because if you think about the combat aspect of like Laguna and the gang, you don't necessarily need the combat elements. You can still tell the story the same way if you want through video. And then I was thinking again, it's like the way that things work these days. Do you remember Final Fantasy 15? They had DLCs for each character. You could just get like a Laguna DLC that would actually go through step by step his whole story. But yeah, I
I
mean,
mean, potentially. If you do take out the
potentially,
combat elements, then at least
yeah,
have like
have the main
combat
story.
cinematics because there are
They're good
uh
scenes that you need to
yeah,
show.
the Sentra ruins, those combats actually play into the story. Um
Right, and you
as
could just
well
show them
as the
fighting,
Lunatic
right?
Pandora.
Yeah.
Um not the Lunatic Pandora, but in Odine's lab when he was taken prisoner in
Yeah, yeah,
S5.
at the end that part's really pivotal. But yeah, I think that would be interesting. And then they could be like, "Oh, here's the video." And then it's like, "Oh, and if you want to play Laguna's full story,
Then if you
10.99,
a
baby."
little bit more money,
Yeah.
you can play Laguna
But it's
Story.
like again, it's like I don't blame companies for that either cuz I like think about how much work that would be extra too. It's like, yeah, obviously you have to make the character models, you have to give them their special attacks and you know what I mean? Because essentially even though so again, for people who might not understand, like the three characters you play act similarly to your party, and you can basically swap all of the items and junctions that they have to those other characters, but they still have their own weapons and own like attack animations and everything. So that definitely is way more work that they would have to do just for those few scenes in the game that they have to have. So that's why I'm thinking about it from a DLC aspect in that case.
I mean, me personally, I would rather just see
I w-
all of that
Pe-
stuff be part of the base game, but whatever they decide to do,
I
they
know, I
decide to
know.
do. So I
Okay,
just don't want to give them any ideas
just don't give
outside
them
of
any
improving the
ideas.
game.
Yes.
Outside of improving the game, I don't want to give them
Yeah.
any ideas for DLC.
So let's use that as a segue into the next topic, which is Junction System. Okay, so Xaida, do you think that you can give a very basic introduction on the Junction System? Try your best.
So the junction system in Final Fantasy VIII was, I mean, essentially it was eight's response to the materia system of 7, but for people that know how to abuse it, it's how you break the game literally in the first 20 minutes of playing.
Okay, let's keep it to the basics though. So let's just
Um,
generally explain
so
what it is.
essentially, when you acquire Guardian Forces, you have to junction them to different characters, and you can switch the junctions between characters. You can have Shiva and Squall, and then partway through the game, okay, I want Shiva and Zell, and so on and so forth. Um, you can junction the Guardian Forces, which allows your team to use different abilities in battle, because without them, all they can do is basic attacks. Once the Guardian Forces are junctioned, you can then junction magical spells onto stats, attributes. You can have it so that you take reduced damage or even heal from specific elements, as well as nullifying certain status ailments as you get later and later in the game.
Right.
I mean, essentially, that's the gist of the junction system.
Yeah, and I will also add in that this is kind of also Final Fantasy VIII's answer to like having armor and stuff.
Yeah,
So rather than accumulate gradually increasing armor that has better stats over the course of the game, you're essentially getting better and better spells that you're junctioning to your Guardian Forces that's making your character stronger. Um,
but
so,
that's only regards to specifically armor, because
right.
they did keep in weapon upgrades,
Exactly.
which
That's why I said armor specifically because
which for certain stats you can junction spells too, but it you're almost better off upgrading your weapons when it comes to increasing like accuracy and like hit percent chance and things like that
right.
than you would be for junctioning spells.
Okay. So now that we talked about the basics, let's talk about how we can number one, they're not gonna make it so it's easily broken. I can guarantee that.
Yeah, they have
Um,
to really
and
change up.
how could we like let's present an idea of how we could implement this more intuitively. I think at least what jumps out at me is maybe like when you obtain a Guardian Force, there's kind of like a level tree that's associated with that you can maybe unlock certain branches to if you put specific like magic into it or something like along those lines. So it's more visual, but it's kind of like this similar concept, you know? It's like, oh, if you put in this material in this slot, it might give you like plus 20 whatever, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of what I'm thinking.
So, I mean, in all honesty, if you want to not break the junction system, it has to be separated from cards, because that was the main way that people could
Okay.
break
Yeah,
the game
we'll
early on.
talk about cards later. So let's keep it
But
at that.
without that, um, I don't know. I mean, I guess Guardian Force's abilities to, like, specifically the magic refining ones. See, that's the thing. It's such a hard thing to figure out, because a lot of that stuff is integral to really take advantage of what the game has to offer.
Right. So let's say that, for example, they keep drawing in, obviously, because it's really the only way to obtain spells, right? So you
Yeah.
can draw spells, but I'm more saying like, how do we present the junction system? I'm not talking about even all this extra stuff that you can exploit it and use it for. I'm more saying how do you make it easy for somebody to understand the junction system and to use it, right? Because again, you're going for a really general audience. I know when I played
Yeah.
as a kid, I didn't understand the junction system. I didn't use it. I did not use it. I didn't get very
I,
far in the game. You know what I mean?
yeah. I do want to clarify, though, at this point, when I am saying take advantage of, I'm
Yeah.
not saying take advantage of to the fullest. I'm just saying to use it to your advantage for a newer player who doesn't
Okay.
understand all of it.
Right.
I mean, yeah, when we get to cards, I could talk about how cards and card mod just breaks the junction system in general. But, I mean, the tutorial that talks about junctioning magic to stats
Yeah.
could be a little bit more in depth, and maybe discussing about like what kinds of spells
Right.
are
Give certain effects
are
and things
better
like that. Yeah.
for different stats, and
Right.
maybe when you're looking at the magic spells that each character has, it go in depth, because in the original version of 8, and any of the remasters, when you're going through the magic tab, all it shows is a list of
Yep.
8 pages of 4 different spells, and it just shows you the spells. It doesn't give you any information, doesn't tell you what it does. You have to go a little bit further to try and figure that out. And they could label each spell as offensive, support, healing, things
Yeah,
like that.
absolutely. I think that that's what they would
To
have to
make
do.
to allow newcomers to say, okay, Curaga is obviously a healing spell. Asuna is a restorative kind of spell, and things like that. I think really taking the onus off of the player to learn what they do
Yeah.
by telling them a little bit more about the spell, I think would probably help.
Yeah, my point is like, okay, what I'm envisioning is this is also similar to the way Final Fantasy VII Remake did weapons. So when you have a weapon, you can open up a menu and you can level up specific things in that weapon that might have certain effects. And it will tell you if you buy that, what it will upgrade. So what I'm imagining is you have a Guardian Force menu, you pull it up, it has an image of the Guardian Force. It has all, like let's say for example, you can junction 5 pieces of magic. It has 5 little things, and it will maybe say something like, yeah, like curative spell plus 20 HP or like whatever, you know what I mean? Like something that's like solid that people can be like, whoa, if I put cure in here, I'm going to get this benefit out of it, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, because that's the most intuitive way to do it. That's showing people. And it's simple enough that they can understand, and I'm sure there will still be complexity with it, but that comes for the players that take it to the next level, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm kind of envisioning there.
Another thing I just thought of was how typically throughout the game, when the Guardian Forces are learning abilities, they'll eventually learn those junctioning abilities that allow you to put magic onto your strength stat, your HP stat, and things like that. I was almost thinking about having it as long as you had a Guardian Force junctioned to that character, that you automatically have that free range. While that would kind of broaden things a bit, my suggestion then would be to say, okay, well, maybe not have magic boost boost your stats as much as it would have originally in 8.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. And like to give you an example again, the weapon upgrades that you can get in 7 remake, like you might get 20 extra MP, which is like not that much, but it's not nothing, right?
Yeah.
You might get 20 extra HP, 20 extra MP. You might get a plus 5% boost to your physical attacks or something, like little things like that. And I think that that's where they would have to go with it in order to keep it balanced and everything anyway. Because the boosts obviously you're getting from the junction system in 8 were pretty high for the later magic in the game. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Especially when you have 100 of them.
But also the game was pretty difficult, so at the end you pretty much needed to utilize those, or else you weren't going to be able to beat the game. So
sense.
Okay.
There are,
yeah.
but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, say what you're going to say.
No, I was just going to say, in a sense, because there are people that took it one step further and added the challenge of not junctioning or not junctioning magic or things like that. So there were ways to ramp up the difficulty, but those are all player imposed challenges, not that the game was offering them as much. But then again, we're also talking about people who played it numerous times and know how to take advantage of the junction system. So
okay. Next topic we're going to talk about fairly quickly, but let's talk about like limit breaks. The one thing I will say from 8 is that I did appreciate that there was a little bit of play between timing and limit breaks. I really like that kind of mechanic. There's a few games that utilize it that I'm a big fan of. I think that needs to stay because I think that is a core part of it. Especially early on, limit breaks in 8 aren't super powerful, but if you can exploit the timings and everything, you can actually do some serious damage, and especially later in the game when you can just string together limit breaks. But I'll say at its core value, I think they can keep it similar and just again, I don't know, do they do timing in games anymore? I think that they do. Probably like, yeah, you have a base damage level, and if you are able to time it correctly, which they could elaborate on, doesn't have to be a simple button press. Maybe it's a few buttons at a certain time. You know, you get critical damage instead of normal damage. I think that would be nice.
I mean, I'm going to disagree with you there.
Okay.
I think limit breaks really allowed 8 to be, I mean, in conjunction with the junction system anyway, allowed it to be as broken as it was because of being in that threshold where you can very easily find limit breaks. You could just spam limit break after limit break.
Oh, I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about if you got a limit break, I think that they should keep the inputs. I think that
you're talking about for the Renzo Kukin and the timing on that.
Yes.
I thought you were talking about limit breaks as a whole.
No. Now we can talk about limit breaks as a whole. So
well, I do want to touch on that. I do like the timing for the Renzo Kukin. I do like the almost fighting combo style for Zell's. Selfies is just kind of scrolling through magic. I feel like they can probably find a way to spruce that up or change her limit break overall. Quistis making her essentially a blue mage. Irvine in allowing him to use different ammo allows for more creativity in what you want to do and allow for more options in battle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that 8 has one of the strongest limit break systems because there's so much diversity, and it really does help you select, like, okay, what?
I was going to say I'm going to intentionally leave out Renoa because I feel like we could probably touch on her a bit later.
Okay. But I do appreciate it really made you feel like if there was a certain limit break you wanted to use, then obviously you would want to use that character. At least with the 7 remake, everybody's limits are just powerful attacks. And obviously, like, I mean, some of them might be better than others. But there was no real strategy there, at least based off of that alone. So I definitely think that that's important.
Well, if we are going to talk about limit breaks broadly,
Yes.
I do feel like limit breaks would need a nerf in the way that
That they're
you shouldn't
triggered.
be able to
Yeah.
spam them.
Yeah,
Um,
I think we could probably settle for the same thing as like 7 has, where you just over time you build it up and then you can use your limit break. I mean that's the only thing that makes sense. I don't know how they
well,
got
even
away
then,
with doing
are
it
you
today.
talking about 7 originally or the remake? Because I don't know how limits
I
work in
think
the
it
remake.
works almost the same in the remake.
Okay,
It's
so
yeah.
I would say that in order of the most balanced way to handle limit breaks, I feel like 10 is probably the most balanced because it allows the freedom for you to use normal attacks when you have your overdrive full. And then it would be 7 in that you have the option to use your other stuff. And then you can use your limit when you feel it's necessary
Yeah, that's
while you
essential.
have that
Yeah.
gauge full. But also with 7 taking away that normal attack kind of thing is kind of wonky to me. 8 was kind of how essentially once you're in a crisis kind of situation, you could still attack or you could use the limit break. But I feel
Yeah.
like Squall using Renzo Kukin leading up to blasting zone or something, and then the very next turn is able to use it again, and then he gets Lionheart.
Yeah. That's the thing. It's like I like the whole idea of like, oh, when you're in crisis you can use it. That's really cool. But yeah, just later in the game it just becomes really silly the number of
So my
times you can
thinking
use it.
is, you have a gauge
Yeah.
per character that will fill up, but the more of a crisis that character's in, that gauge will fill up faster.
I feel like
You
that could
understand?
also be exploited, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
Well, not to say that you could fill it up in one turn if your
Yeah,
character's at
sure.
1 HP.
Sure,
Like
sure.
you
But the
can
rate might be
play
slightly
around with
faster.
numbers.
Yeah, I think that that's
Exactly.
fine. I think actually Dragon Quest XI did something not like super similar, but you could mess around with the rate that which your special ability would build up. So I think
Yeah.
that that's something you can play around with. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm just nerfing Final Fantasy VIII in the remake. There are just certain things that just didn't really like make sense to me
I
that I
mean, there
think
were
that they should
definitely certain
change.
things that
Yeah,
made it that if you knew how to
exploit it.
exploit it,
Yeah,
that you can just breeze through the game,
right,
which
right.
I mean is fine for me. I mean that option, having that option available to people that want to use it that way, is great because people should be allowed to play the game however they want.
Right.
But for other people, that can be a turnoff and saying, "Oh, well, this game's just too easy."
Yeah. Next thing I have on the list is drawing. I'm not sure if we really need to have a whole conversation about drawing. So, drawing is the essentially the act of using one of your character's ability slots to be able to grab magic from enemies essentially. And it's so much of a core aspect of the game. I don't think that they can really change it. I think it has to coexist or it has to exist in some sense. But they could play around maybe with how it actually works. Like I don't know. Do you have any ideas there?
I feel like drawing should not take up an ability slot. I think it
Yeah,
should be an innate thing that
agreed.
they should have that can be in the magic tab.
Yes,
You go into magic, draw. Okay, then you pick the enemy.
right.
You pick who to
And
draw
obviously
from.
it would waste your turn. I don't think it should be
Yes,
something that doesn't waste a
because
turn, but
because it
yeah,
should waste your turn
yeah,
because it did so in
yes.
8 originally.
Yeah, and it just makes sense. It'd be way too good if you could just continuously draw. But
I'm gonna draw while I'm
yeah,
using.
something else.
Yeah,
Or or again, I could maybe foresee a very specific type of attack that you could use that would draw specifically.
like a
Um,
mug,
yeah,
like a
yeah,
like essentially a
exactly.
magical mug.
Yeah, exactly. I think that would be fine as well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that opens up a lot of different
Right,
possibilities
right.
in having stuff like that.
So yeah, we'll see. I think that's probably all we need to say about it, unless you want to go in any more detail than that. I just wanted to
Uh,
mention it because obviously it's a mechanic that they've really never used again.
yeah,
It's pretty
and I think
unique.
because I feel like it was because there was just a lot of backlash between the draw system and the junction
Yeah,
system
I think the
in
combo was
conjunction, and the
really
fact that
crazy.
when you're junctioning magic, you're effectively lowering your stats if you're using magic that you have junctioned.
Yes.
So there's that play between like, oh, well, I want to draw all these Ultima spells because I want to junction into my strength stat, but now I can't use them because then my character becomes weaker.
Yeah, that's maybe we can talk about that as a whole, but again, that is a dilemma. And I think that aspect is kind of an interesting dilemma because it does. I think if they were balanced, imagine you had pure balance and you said, okay, I have this Ultima spell, but it's also contributing to the power of my character or the stats of my character. I can either use it and do a lot of damage and then I have a one-time use, or I can keep it and get whatever benefit I'm having from it. If that was closely looked at and balanced, I think it could be super interesting and I think it would make really good gameplay. But I think that you just would have a lot of problems trying to keep that equal.
Yeah, I mean that would in general, be a very hard thing to balance.
Yeah, but I think if they could play around with that would be super interesting like gameplay.
I do have some ideas, but we could touch on that
Okay.
Later on when we
so
go in depth in that topic.
Right, we'll move on from draw. Again, just quickly wanted to mention seed rank. Do you want to talk about seed rank at all?
What is that?
So seed rank is like you're a seed soldier essentially, or a seed member in Final Fantasy VIII, and as you do like missions and stuff, you level up your seed rank, and every X amount of time you get paid because of your seed rank. Do you remember this? It's such a small thing.
I haven't noticed.
Yeah, so
I'm just making light of it.
I know.
It's probably one of the most pointless things in the game.
Exactly. I was just trying to think if maybe there was any way that they could make it actually cool, and let's
make it relevant.
Yeah, let's not discredit in the beginning of the game. The amount of money you're getting in the beginning of the game is pretty useful, and you can buy items with it.
Yeah.
Just eventually becomes a point where you're just like, this is so random, and I don't care. I don't know. Maybe it could be more of like, I'm thinking like, I don't know. Maybe it can somehow relate to like something you collect or something. Like maybe there's something that you find, and if you grab it, it will increase the amount of money you can earn or something. I don't know. Reward players for going above and beyond somehow. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't know.
In order to do that, they would have to add in a bunch of different elements that interact with your role as a seed.
Right, member. Like maybe you find like diaries of other seed members, and because of that, you know, you get some new understanding and it buffs something. But again, I don't know, it's just something I'm thinking, and especially from a lore perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to feed into the lore a little bit, what could be done is having things, more options of, okay, do I want to help this person or should I let them handle it themselves? Right. And having those kind of options, like what happens in the Battle of Garden with Norg
and the
cultists.
A good point, yeah.
How you don't have to fight. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 mandatory fights in that little section where you're going to each hall to help people.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to fight those. You could let them handle it. And then they have different outcomes.
Right.
I feel like having more options like that would allow you to, I mean, for some people that want to avoid gaining experience, or for people who are just like, I feel like they can handle it, I want to go and focus on this instead. I feel like giving those options with repercussions of, oh, this is going to affect my seed level.
That's actually a really good idea, because you're kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone there. You're adding an additional feature that people could or couldn't take advantage of, but it also has consequence, right? I think that's super interesting. Yeah, that sounds really good, actually. We should pitch that to Square Enix.
There does need to be more. There needs to be more than just that for the seed rank, because it's so. It's barely noticeable at the beginning, and they don't really explain too much on how to raise your rank other than doing battles and taking exams.
Yep, and I know that for me, the first playthrough I didn't pay attention to it at all. The second playthrough I wanted to get the platinum trophy, which you had to reach the max seed rank. And then I'm like, how do you
Yeah,
even raise seed rank? And then I like found out how to
exactly.
do it and took the exams and I'm like, that was random.
Yeah, the exams are probably the best way to raise your seed rank
Yeah.
because
Yep.
outside of that, you end up halted somewhere between 11 and 7.
Mhm.
So
was
it almost
interesting.
doesn't even make sense.
Okay,
So adding more of a purpose and a better understanding in how to raise it, I feel
yes.
like would probably do it more justice.
Let's talk about Triple Triad, the best mini game that exists. Okay, but
Ever.
okay,
The
again,
best mini game that exists
yes.
ever.
Let's first talk about it, and we're not going to talk about any of the complicated things. We're talking about the core game. Imagine Gwent. We're just going to talk about the card game. So, if anyone's not familiar who's watching this, because not everybody partakes in Triple Triad who plays the game. It is an in-game card game that you can win. You can play other people, NPCs, win their cards, and it's super super interesting. It's pretty simple until you get into the more complex rules. Um, Unfortunately, I think if they were to make a remake, they could definitely make it as big of a. I think they have to make it as big of a feature. I'm just not sure they're gonna keep the all of the elements that you can do with the cards. Like I think if I could get exactly what I wanted, I would just get the card game and the fact that you can win cards from other players and that they might just be cosmetic and maybe you can just look at your collection, you know what I mean? Like visually. I think that would
Yeah.
probably be what they should do with it, honestly.
Now, while this is going to maybe sound contradictory,
Mhm.
I do like that the card game had an impact in the main game with
Right.
regards to card mod and junction. And again, that's something we can touch on later. So I think keeping it as a cosmetic thing kind of takes some of the fun out of it.
Okay, here's my proposal then is like again, I'm comparing to Witcher 3 because I think they did a really good job in Witcher 3 of how to implement Gwent. So it's like, for the most part, you don't have to play Gwent at all. I think there's like one or two quests that involve Gwent, but you don't even necessarily have to do it. Or like, I think there's a mission where you have to play somebody, but it doesn't matter if you win or lose. You just play them, right? And I think
Yeah.
that that's what they have to be careful of. I think there can be other elements, but I don't think the benefits of them can be so high that you're almost forced to do it. You know what I'm saying? I
Well,
think
here's the
they're,
thing:
yeah,
card triple triad in Final Fantasy VIII is 100% optional.
yeah.
You get the cards from talking to an NPC in a hallway going to the elevator.
Right,
You
right.
don't talk to him, you don't get the cards.
That's true. So that yeah, that might be the way to do it. But I'm just saying, like, I guess eventually we have to get into the part where we talk about all of the things you can do with the cards.
Yeah. I mean, the card game in and of itself is very fun.
Yes,
It does add there's a lot of strategy that can be involved. Um, and while it can be frustrating at times with certain rules, sometimes it makes things that much more interesting, even if it's not um, fully understood. You know what I mean?
yeah. And all I'm saying is, Square Enix, if you ever make this remake, please make a full set of triple triad cards that you sell with the collector's edition. Thank you.
And a standalone triple triad game. It will sell.
And is and also a standalone triple triad game. And yes, I know that they already have the cards; they exist, but they're expensive. So thank you. Thank you for my public service announcement. Okay, I guess for the time being, let's move on from Triple Triad. We'll come back to it when we talk about card modding, I guess. Um, so we mentioned in the beginning, Guardian Forces are essentially the summons of Final Fantasy VIII, but there are actually a lot of differences compared to most of the traditional Final Fantasy games. So the biggest one being you have Guardian Forces, you can swap them around to whatever you want. They can give you stat bonuses if you junction them, but let's not even consider that. When you call them out, they will come out. It will be a certain amount of time that they have to attack. And if you take damage when they are out, your summon is actually taking damage for you. So later in the game, you can actually utilize your guardian forces just to take damage for you, if you want, and then they actually die and you have to revive them. So again, I like this personally because it's so different and I think it's so interesting. It adds a lot of complexity to the game. But there are parts of the game where the only thing to do is just constantly use Guardian Forces. The other thing I forgot to mention is that you can have multiple Guardian Forces and use them all simultaneously. There's no limit on how many times you can use them as long as they are alive. So let's talk about this a little bit. I want to see what Xaida's opinion is about it.
I mean, there should be more support. Guardian Forces.
Right.
Like Carbuncle, I think is really the only one that, Carbuncle's the only one that provides support.
Yeah, I think he is.
Cerberus is the only one that provides utility.
Right.
Most of the rest of them just deal damage.
Yeah, they're just damage.
Or status effects.
Right.
There needs to be more diversity there.
Right. So let's hypothetically come up with something. Again, I'll mention how Final Fantasy VII Remake works. It's kind of similar. So you will, after a certain amount of time, you are able to summon, which I think is also something we need to do. There needs to be some kind of limit on when you are allowed to use a Guardian Force. I don't think you should just be able to always use a Guardian Force, unless it was limited, like the number of times you could use it per battle. Then once the summon comes out, it's controlled by AI. It just runs around. You can select one or two different types of abilities, and then eventually it uses a super powerful attack, and then it will go away. It's just out for a certain amount of time. So that's kind of similar in a way, because that's kind of how the Guardians Forces worked. Like, you would use them, they would use a very specific attack most of the time for most of them. And then eventually they would attack and then they would leave. And so I'm not sure how we can get somewhere in between these two things and still make it seem interesting, because I do really like the aspect of them being able to die, them being able to tank damage for you. Like, again, to explain for people who might not be aware, when your Guardian Force is out, your character is gone, essentially. Like, they're not on the playfield anymore. They can't be affected, right?
Yeah, so when you summon them, there's just an animation that plays while the Guardian Force is out, and then when that animation's done, it switches back to your party.
Right.
But while you're casting that summon, I agree. I like the fact that they can tank damage for you, and I mean, at worst, be a sacrificial lamb to keep a character alive. I like that aspect. Would I like to see that back in a potential remake? Yes. If they got rid of it, would I be upset? Probably not.
Probably not. One thing I was thinking is that when you were explaining it is maybe it could be two aspects. Maybe your Guardian Force could come out and tank damage for you. And also, if you did that, you'd probably be penalized when you actually use them to attack. So you would, again, it would come up with an interesting decision where you say, in this battle, do I want to use Ifrit to tank damage? Or do I want to use his fire ability that's going to deal a lot of damage to the enemy that I'm fighting? You know what I mean? Because they are Guardian Forces, right? So they're the one type of summon that actually makes it seem like they're there to protect you and not just to do offense, right? So
yeah. Having that option of summoning them to be offensive or defensive is a little... I mean, I don't really know how I would describe that.
Yeah.
I want to go back and just reiterate the point that I think that they should be more diverse and allowing each one to do more different things, therefore allowing the strategy. And instead of saying, well, do I want Ifrit to defend? No, I want Ifrit to do damage. I'm going to summon Carbuncle so I get Protect, Shell, and Reflect on all my characters. And I think if they do go the route of having it as like an AI-controlled thing, I feel like maybe if you summon someone like Carbuncle that you don't put Shell, Protect, and Reflect on all at once. Maybe it's over time. Carbuncle will target your characters and say, okay, here you go. Now you all have Protect. Okay, now you have Shell. Now you have Shell. Now you have Reflect. You have Shell.
Yeah.
Like, I think doing it maybe that way but it's an odd thing because personally, I would want. I'm torn on whether or not I want actual control over the Guardian Force, or if I want it to just be a summon, do damage, or do its effect and get out.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I'm torn. And I think that this is actually, which is kind of weird if you ask me, I think this is actually one of the things that I think they have the most potential to really change it up, because I think that the way that it was so old school, and I don't think they would ever make a game like that would do something similar to that anymore, where you're literally
Yeah,
forced to channel your Guardian Force and stuff. And just it's just like not the way that games are working right now. So I think that they would probably implement it similarly to 7, and maybe like what you said, where I would hope that the summons would all have their own identity and do different types of things, and like maybe one would just come out and tank for you, and that would be his thing, like Titan, or I mean, Titan's in that game, right? I can't even remember.
no, he's not.
No. Oh, okay. Well, there you go. But you could take a beefy summon.
Alexander is.
Alexander, but yeah, but then Alexander's usually holy, so I know.
Yeah, but
I'm
I
just
mean,
saying you
holy
could.
healing
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
thing is kind of. I almost when I think of holy as like a concept, I almost think paladin,
Yeah. I always think
which
paladin.
I
Yeah.
associate with like defense, even though
Yeah.
it's like
That's
an
true.
offensive stat too. Not a stat,
Or
but just
again, it could
offensive
be a
magic.
duality thing.
Yeah.
Maybe you use Alexander to tank and cure you, or you use him to cast holy.
Now, one thing, and this is just a spitball idea, and I don't know how this would even play out logistically or with regards to memory and with consoles and
Yeah.
computers and
Sure.
stuff. But the idea of being able to have each character summoning their Guardian Force like they normally would in 8, but then they would all be on the field at once, controlled by AI and all doing different things, I feel like would allow
I
some
think they could
strategy.
do that. Yeah.
But I feel like that gives it an opportunity for, oh, well, just summon everything every time and fights are
Yeah,
over.
well, you would have to limit it, but I think that
Yeah,
I would definitely want to see, because I think it's just part of the game, is like, in my opinion, for the 8 remake, I would want to see if there was a Guardian Force out, there were no of the original characters. Like, Squall would not be there. Like, if any of them
which in
were
that
out.
point, it would
Yeah.
make no sense to have an AI control them, so it would be
Yeah.
player controlled. But for someone like Carbuncle, like how would that work then? Like if you summon Carbuncle, what's Carbuncle just going to stay on the field? Then now Carbuncle has no support kind of identity there,
Yeah, yeah, it's
unless
true.
unless he could cast spells on the players that aren't there, so that when they do come
Yeah,
back,
yeah,
but
that could
then
be. Yeah, yeah, it could be.
they're so it
I believe me,
with
I
that it
don't
could
think they'll do it
become
like
very
that, but yeah.
confusing,
Yeah, I
very
don't
very
think they would
confusing.
make it so that the main characters were not there anymore. It would be additionally, but anyway. So I definitely do feel like that would have the most potential of being completely different, because there's just a lot of possibilities there, and the way that it is not going to stay for sure if they ever do
Yeah, but
anything.
I will say it is probably the highest potential of just chaotic and
Yeah,
just kind of if it. I feel like if it's handled wrong, it'll be horrible.
yeah,
If it's handled
exactly.
properly, it'll turn out to probably be one of the best design ideas in the game. But
Mm.
do I know what would make it work ideally? I don't. I have no
Yeah, it
clue.
was funny because I had like brainstormed about this before, and in my head it sounded like a good idea. And when we had this conversation, I was like, I don't think any of these ideas would actually work. Um, I think aesthetics of the characters, I think everybody looks pretty good, and they could make them definitely look good. I mean, the 7 remake, they did an amazing job. I think they really kept everyone's character models pretty similar, but elaborated on some characters that, like, Red 13 sticks out to me, because obviously in the PS1 version, you can't even really tell like what he is. He's just like it's just this little monster thing, and they really fleshed his character out. They gave him a really cool voice and everything like that. So I'm hyped on that. But the one thing that sticks out in my mind is Zell's tribal tattoos on his face.
What you mean, Mike
Um,
Tyson?
yeah, number one, that's a good point, is that if they were to make the game and he's in it and still has that tattoo, he would probably get sued by Mike Tyson. No joke. Because it's a very. I think I heard that Mike Tyson even sued Hangover, because the Hangover, they got it like a Mike Tyson tattoo.
Well, I'm
So I
pretty
don't
sure
know.
Zell's character was inspired by Mike Tyson. So
Yeah, but I'm
it would
saying
be
I
kind
think
of an
that they
odd.
can. Yeah, I just don't know if they'd be able to get away with it, is what I'm saying. And I'm
I
wondering.
think they could. I think at the very
Okay,
least they could settle.
well, let's say if they couldn't, though, what would you want to see from them that could keep the core? I mean, obviously his personality is still gonna be the same, right? Do you
Yeah, you
think?
don't change the personality
Right, right. But do
of
you think you
characters
could
like
keep
that. But
Zell, take
I
away his
mean,
tattoo, and still have the same personality? I think absolutely.
yeah, I think you can do that. But I think
Yeah.
there you can maybe play around with it and maybe not have it exactly the same, maybe just a little different if that's the issue, if it looks
Right. That's
too
what I'm thinking
identical.
as well. I think you can have a subtle face tattoo that still makes him seem like he's a tough dude, but at the same time not be like that. If you look at the image, it's like half of his face. It really is. It's pretty
Yeah.
big.
But I mean, let's
Um,
really be honest here. Can you copyright a tattoo?
I'm we're not gonna get into the details of Mike Tyson, but yeah, I don't think so, technically.
I think it's something that we're kind of just blowing up out of nowhere, and I don't really think it's going to have much of a relevance when you really dig into it. I think
No, I don't think
that's
so
my
either.
opinion there.
I just have a feeling like if they were gonna do it, I think honestly they would remove it completely. I think
But if we were going to talk
yeah,
about that, I think that you could still. I think yes, you can take away that face, those markings on Zell's face, the tattoos, and not change the personality. I think you still have the same character.
yeah, okay. That's but let's keep it like a proactive conversation. So maybe let's get your opinion on, do you think they should keep it? What could they tweak to make it better going forward?
Make it accessible later in the game.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
I think you keep it, you make
Yep.
it accessible much later because as it stands, when you get Quetzalcoatl, it's 40 AP to learn card and another 80 to learn card mod. You can you could get that before you even leave for Timber.
Okay. So yeah, let's just say that, and I think that's the best way of saying it is RPGs are known for giving you really powerful things, but much later in the game, so you can't exploit them in the beginning of the game. It's not like they give you ultimate weapon in the beginning of the game. Like, what's the fun in that, right?
Yeah, I mean, uh,
Essentially.
you can break your characters as early as really the end of disc 1 is when you can really just have everything you need to just coast through the rest of the game if you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Allowing card mod like to be available later on, maybe even having like a dedicated place to card mod where you
Yeah,
could bring
that
the
yeah, sure.
where like you'll go around playing cards, you'll collect the cards, and then later on you find it. I don't know, the Queen of Cards. She'll now travel around the world, collecting cards and spreading rules, and also you can trade in your cards for items and be able to use those items to refine magic.
I
So
think that's
it would
actually a
it would
really great
allow.
idea. I think that
I
would
feel like
solve a
that
lot
would
of
be
the
a
issues.
good way
Yeah.
to really nerf card mod.
And that does seem
Still
like
allow
something
it
they would,
to be a
yeah.
thing.
And it seems like that would be something that they could actually implement in a modern game. Like I feel like I've seen systems like that.
Not only that, it would partially incentivize like traveling back and forth to different
Right.
areas.
Or I'm even thinking like maybe she's only in very specific locations, so you have to be at a certain point in the game to even get these items, right? Not even
No,
tracking her down, but they're like, oh, well, you don't even see her until three-fourths of the way done with the game, right?
3/4 of the way is a little too late,
Yeah, okay, okay. But
but
even
I
the
think
things that
that
she
the like
offers you could be
I think
worse.
that well, here's another thing. She doesn't like she might it might be like a limited time offer kind of thing. Like,
Yeah,
oh, give us 5 geezer cards and we'll give you screws. When when you first meet her, maybe she has like a limited option of things,
that's what I'm
and
saying.
then
Yeah.
as you progress and you find her more and more, you kind of unlock more things, and she'll notice, oh, you have the Quistis card. Well, I can give you 3 Samantha souls for it
hmm Yeah, I think
if
it
they
has
decide
to
to keep
work.
the same items. That is.
It has to work the same as like an accessory shop, weapon shop, etc. It has to just
I
build
think
with
that's
time. Yeah,
yes, but also make it more rewarding. You
to
have to
do it
look for
more.
it to
Yeah,
find it.
yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah. the one thing I almost forgot to talk about that's a big mechanic in the game is let's talk about the fact that enemies level up based off your own level.
I mean, it's a good and a bad thing at the same time.
Yeah, and again, going forward, would it be something that you think they should include? I personally think that it's probably something that we would not see because even though it was a really good idea, I think the only people that are going to be looking for it are really the super fans that want to relive that experience. And if they want to do that, they can always play the original or play the remaster, etc.
Having enemies level up with you, I
Yeah.
think, allows the game to scale more. Um, I think if they were to keep it to probably scale enemy stats more, so that way you get not punished more for leveling up, but like instead of saying, I don't know, I feel like there could be a way to scale it so that when you level up, that's how you can make the game more difficult, or maybe
What about even out
or
extra mode?
maybe in reverse. Maybe the enemies are harder early on, and then when you level up, they don't scale as much, so your characters start to out level the
Hmm.
enemies.
I was thinking mostly just maybe doing a separate mode that's like, hey,
Maybe
do you
maybe
want to
like
play
as
in
a
mode where the enemies will level up with you instead of having them at set levels? I think that it could be like a hardcore
I mean
mode
that
or
would just
something.
I mean that's the question. Does
Yeah,
that brings into question, is it actually
actually
harder
harder.
to
Yeah,
have
I agree.
enemies level up with you or to have them at a set level? If
Yeah,
you have them at a set level, then yeah, you can argue that you could just grind past that level
yeah.
and then you can beat them no problem versus fighting Omega Weapon at level 100.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting duality, and it also makes me wonder. I've never actually looked into it, but it almost to me seems like the reason they did it was because they got a little bit lazy and they didn't want to level out all of the enemies to specific levels where they were just like, hey, we have this mechanic where the stronger you get, the stronger the enemies get, and it's like, oh, that's good, that's
I would
nice.
probably argue against the laziness because
Yeah,
you would have to factor in that the enemies scale up. So you would have to have a scaling thing, and like yes, you don't have to
you don't have
set
to say, okay, this guy's
stats
only level
per
30.
level,
Yeah,
but you do have to worry about the scaling of them, and you have to balance the scaling on each one of them.
yeah, that's
So
true.
I
That's
think
true.
that adds in more work.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's also an interesting one. I think that would also make or break. But that's why I'm saying like I think that overall they would probably keep it so enemies are defined levels cuz players although a lot of more casual players might not like the grind, everybody likes the idea of getting stronger and then just blowing through things. Like that's kind of what makes RPGs interesting to a lot of people is that you can sit there and put in the time and you will be able to do it, right?
Yeah,
So I think that they kind of need to keep that.
yeah, I agree.
So I think that pretty much covers all of our topics. I really enjoyed having you on Xaida. I'm looking forward to hopefully someday getting this remake. And if anybody who's watching this has any feedback or anything in the game, if there was a remake that they would want to see, or they would do things completely differently than us, like we're idiots, just let us know in the comments. And I'm gonna leave a link to Zeta's channel in there as well, so you guys can check that out. And be on the lookout for further podcasts where we talk with people who really enjoy specific games. Peace.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Schnick.
You're
I
welcome.
really enjoyed this. I hope to be back soon.
Me too. Thank you.